Grandpa always said that if you give a nosy neighbor a clipboard, you create a monster. But none of us thought the monster would literally vault over our backyard fence at midnight with a flashlight, wearing what looked like night vision goggles and mumbling about unauthorized flower beds. I was eating cold pizza in the kitchen when I saw it. A figure scaling our 6-foot fence like a parkour ninja with osteoporosis, landing with a thud in our petunia patch. It wasn't a burglar. It was Brenda Latchley, head of the HOA patrol committee, and she was trespassing on our property like she was auditioning for a budget spy movie. The next morning, Grandpa rewired the entire fence and muttered, "If they want to play dirty, we'll give em a little jolt of justice." The thing about living in Grudgewood Lane is that everything looks perfect. The grass is always mowed. The shutters are all colonial blue. The driveways are pressure washed weekly, and if they're not, the HOA drops a warning notice on your doorstep like it's a ransom note. I'd grown up thinking this was normal. That is, until Grandpa Joe moved in with us last year after Grandma passed. He was like dropping a Mentos into the community's Diet Coke. Within 2 weeks, he had already racked up 3 HOA violations. One for putting up a windmill sculpture, another for painting his shed red, unauthorized color tone, and one, my personal favorite, for yelling communist at Brenda during a board meeting and storming out with a donut in each hand. So it didn't shock anyone, no pun intended, that Grandpa eventually snapped. But it started with the footage. Grandpa installed cameras after the HOA fined us for leaving out a hose that wasn't even ours. It belonged to the Johnsons, and it clearly had their initials on the nozzle. That night, the footage showed Brenda hopping our fence, sneaking around with a flashlight, and measuring our garden gnome with a ruler. At one point, she even poked through our recycling bin like she was looking for state secrets in soda cans. When Grandpa saw the footage, something inside him cracked. He watched it 5 times without saying a word. Then he stood up, muttered, "War has rules. This ain't war," and went into the garage. What emerged over the next 48 hours was a combination of engineering genius and retirement boredom. Using copper wiring, an old truck battery, several extension cords, and an unhealthy amount of duct tape, he electrified the fence. Not enough to kill, just enough to make someone reconsider their life choices. Of course, my mom told him he was insane. My dad tried to reason with him. I, on the other hand, just filmed the whole thing for my YouTube channel. Grandpa called it Operation Sparky Perimeter. He even attached a wooden sign. Trespassers will be shocked. Literally. The first night it was active, nothing happened. The second night, we heard the scream. It was high-pitched, undignified, and loud enough to make 2 dogs start howling down the street. We ran outside and found Brenda lying on the ground beside the fence, twitching like she just tried to French kiss a toaster. She was fine mostly, just a little frazzled. Her wig was askew, and she smelled faintly of burnt polyester. She threatened to sue on the spot, then waddled away while dialing someone on her phone and loudly announcing that she was assaulted by a geriatric delinquent. By morning, it was all over the neighborhood. The HOA sent us a formal complaint with phrases like reckless endangerment and intentional use of hazardous force. Grandpa framed it and put it above the fireplace. Mom was furious. Dad disappeared into his office and pretended not to exist, and I started gaining subscribers faster than ever. Brenda, meanwhile, started appearing on doorsteps warning people about weaponized boomers. It didn't help that Grandpa started gaining fans. Mr. Cho across the street sent over a fruit basket. Ms. Ramirez brought pie. People started asking Grandpa for advice on defensive landscaping. One guy even offered him money to rig his mailbox to spray water at nosy visitors. Grandpa politely declined but took the pie. The HOA, however, was not amused. They fined us again, $5 grand this time, and threatened legal action. That's when Sanjay Patel, a lawyer who lived 3 doors down and had 3 separate HOA violations for his unapproved bonsai tree, knocked on our door. "I've been waiting for someone to finally push back," he said. Stepping over a garden hose Brenda had probably marked as contraband. "I'll take the case. Free of charge." And just like that, the war escalated. It wasn't just about the fence anymore. It was about the spying, the petty rules, the secret inspections. Brenda had become a symbol of everything wrong with Grudgewood Lane. And Grandpa? He became the symbol of defiance, of resistance, of sticking it to the hyper-manicured man. But none of us were prepared for what came next. Because 2 nights after the Brenda zapping incident, someone cut the wires. Grandpa found the remains in the morning. Snapped cords, charred ivy, and footprints leading away from the back gate. No one admitted to it, but Grandpa swore it was sabotage. And for the first time, he looked rattled. "This isn't just nosiness anymore," he said quietly. "This is organized. They're sending a message." And so, in the suburban calm of Grudgewood Lane, beneath the hummingbird feeders and pastel siding, the real war had begun. Brenda claimed she was electrocuted by a hostile security mechanism designed to target her personally, as if Grandpa had crafted the fence specifically to zap her aura. The way she told it, she had merely been conducting a routine inspection for shrub encroachment, which apparently required a tactical flashlight and scaling private property in the dead of night. By morning, the story had grown wings. The HOA sent an emergency bulletin accusing us of weaponizing residential infrastructure, and local news vans began circling like vultures. One anchor even referred to Grandpa as the shock doc, which made him beam with pride. Mom didn't think it was funny. Neither did Dad, who now answered all questions by staring silently into his coffee mug. But Grandpa had declared victory. At least until the cease and desist letter showed up. It was printed on thick cream-colored cardstock, the kind that made you feel like the apocalypse was arriving in style. The letter accused Grandpa of endangering neighborhood safety and violating several obscure subsections of the HOA charter, including Clause 14C, unregulated electrical barriers, and Clause 5G, hostile ornamentation. They demanded immediate dismantling of the fence, payment of a $5,000 fine, and a written apology to Brenda. Grandpa read the letter twice, snorted, and then used it to clean a wrench covered in axle grease. Brenda, meanwhile, was doubling down. She'd been spotted wearing a neck brace and walking with a limp, even though the fence shock had been equivalent to a bee sting on steroids. She called the police, filed a lawsuit, and appeared on a daytime talk show called Neighborhood Nightmares, where she compared Grandpa's actions to medieval warfare. "He's turned a suburban community into a battlefield," she said, as the host gasped theatrically. She even brought props, a burnt glove and a singed clipboard. Grandpa watched the episode while eating cereal and muttered, "Should have used a stronger voltage." That's when Sanjay Patel showed up again, carrying a stack of papers and a mischievous smile. "They want to play legal games," he said. "Let's give them a lawsuit due." Sanjay explained that trespassing was still illegal, even in Grudgewood Lane, and that there was ample security footage proving Brenda had entered our property multiple times without permission. In one video, she even poked Grandpa's grill with a ruler and sniffed the coals. "What's she looking for? Secret codes in the charcoal?" Sanjay asked. As news spread of Brenda's late-night expeditions, something strange happened. Neighbors began siding with Grandpa. Mrs. Wilkins from 2 houses down came by with lemon bars and a flash drive full of her own doorbell cam footage, Brenda snooping through her flower pots. Mr. Cho revealed she once measured the distance between his recycling bins. Even mild-mannered Pastor Reynolds admitted Brenda had once fined him for having aggressive ivy. It wasn't just about the fence anymore. It was about freedom and law gnomes. Soon, Grandpa became a local legend. Kids started calling him Shock Grandpa, and someone spray-painted "Don't Tread on Joe" on the community mailbox. People were fed up with the HOA measuring their grass with rulers, fed up with citations for festive holiday displays that violated the Spirit Consistency Clause. One neighbor, Carol, confessed she'd been hiding a purple wind chime in her garage for 6 years like it was contraband. It all came to a head when Grandpa and Sanjay filed a counterclaim. Their case was simple. Brenda had trespassed multiple times, was caught on video, and had retaliated out of embarrassment. Sanjay presented a USB drive labeled Brendagate, and we all sat silently in the courtroom as the footage played, Brenda climbing the fence, tripping over a rake, inspecting our compost bin, and at one point, eating one of Grandpa's tomatoes directly off the vine. Brenda's lawyer, a tightly wound man who looked allergic to humor, objected frequently. But the judge, a woman with a no-nonsense haircut and a visible disdain for nonsense, allowed most of the evidence. When she asked Brenda if she had permission to enter our property, Brenda stammered something about neighborhood integrity monitoring. The judge narrowed her eyes and said, "That's not a thing." Still, the fence was a complication. It wasn't technically illegal, but it lived in a gray area of suburban law, especially when electricity was involved. Sanjay argued it was non-lethal and a response to repeated intrusion. Brenda's lawyer countered that it was a reckless and deliberate booby trap. Grandpa tried to speak at one point, but was advised to let Sanjay handle the talking after referring to Brenda as the nosy Antichrist of hedges. The judge took a recess. We waited in silence, the room thick with tension and the faint scent of copier toner. When she returned, she adjusted her glasses, looked at Brenda, and said, "You did trespass," repeatedly. "However, Mr. Reynolds, your fence is imaginative." She paused. "You are hereby ordered to deactivate it, receive a formal warning, and pay a $500 fine for reckless modification of residential equipment." Brenda's jaw dropped. Grandpa nodded solemnly. It was a draw, but it felt like a win. The aftermath was immediate. Brenda was suspended from her HOA position pending review. Several other committee members resigned mysteriously within days. A community meeting was scheduled to reevaluate HOA oversight protocols. Grandpa called it Judgment Lawn. The neighborhood was buzzing with gossip and rebellion. People started putting out flamingos. Someone installed a pink dragon on their roof. Mr. Cho brought out his illegal bonsai and named it Brenda. But peace was temporary. 2 nights after the court ruling, Grandpa heard a noise. He went outside and found the wires on the fence cut again. This time, they weren't just snipped. They were yanked out, buried, and covered with mulch. Someone had sabotaged it professionally. Grandpa stared at the mess and didn't say a word. He just looked up at the night sky, then down at the tracks leading away from the gate. He didn't fix the fence that night. Instead, he went back into the garage, shut the door, and started sketching something new. I peeked over his shoulder. It looked like a schematic for a motion sensor sprinkler system, laced with glitter. I asked him what it was. He said, "Insurance." The next morning, someone left an anonymous note in our mailbox. It was typed, unsigned, and terrifyingly bland. It read, "You've been warned. Dismantle all unauthorized modifications. HOA surveillance program phase 2 has begun." Grandpa read it, smiled, and said, "Let's see what phase 3 looks like when it gets wet." Then he stapled the note to the garage wall next to his blueprint and wrote above it in Sharpie, "Battle plans." Grudgewood Lane was quiet that day. Too quiet. The flamingos remained standing. The gnome army was growing. And the war, as Grandpa liked to say, was just getting interesting. It started with the birdhouses. At first glance, they looked innocent, quaint little things mounted on metal poles or hanging from porches, painted pastel or decorated with sunflower motifs. But when Grandpa took one down from Mrs. Wilkins's yard to help her rehang it after a storm, something rattled inside. He cracked it open and found a tiny black device tucked behind a panel, no bigger than a thumb. A microphone. Grandpa stared at it like it had insulted his mother, then marched home carrying the birdhouse like it was evidence in a federal trial. The moment he set it on the kitchen table, Mom screamed. Dad just sighed and rubbed his temples. But Grandpa looked like a detective who'd finally found the missing piece to the suburban conspiracy board in his brain. Sanjay confirmed the device was real. He showed up with a magnifying glass and a tech buddy from law school who used to work in cybersecurity. After some poking and decoding, they discovered the signal had been bouncing to a cloud server registered under something called HOA Intelligence Monitoring Incorporated. That was not just a name. Someone somewhere was recording what people said on their porches. Pastor Reynolds almost fainted when he found a similar mic under the base of his hummingbird feeder. And when Brenda was asked about it by a furious Mrs. Wilkins, she said, "It's part of our community safety enhancement initiative." Then she locked herself in her house for 2 days and ordered groceries through a third-party app so she wouldn't have to face anyone. That's when Grandpa called the neighborhood meeting. He didn't ask the HOA for permission. He didn't bother with a sign-up sheet. He simply walked to the middle of the cul-de-sac one afternoon, set up 3 folding chairs, a cooler of lemonade, and a whiteboard that said HOA, Hidden Operations Agency, in permanent marker. By 6 o'clock, over 2 dozen neighbors had gathered. Some brought lawn chairs. One brought popcorn. Pastor Reynolds brought a foldable pulpit. And Grandpa, standing there with his camera crew. Me and my friend Luca, with 2 phones and a drone, announced, "Welcome to the First Tribunal of Grudgewood Lane." Sanjay stepped forward and started presenting evidence. Security footage of Brenda trespassing. Audio from the microphones. Screenshots of emails that had been leaked anonymously, showing HOA committee members discussing subtle behavioral corrections for non-compliant residents. The term behavioral corrections sent a chill through the crowd. One neighbor raised his hand and said he'd been told to stop wearing tank tops in his own garage. Another said she'd received an HOA citation for having a laughing Buddha statue that was spiritually inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetics. And then there was the parrot. Mr. Gomez's parrot, Paco, had apparently learned a few phrases that weren't normal. During the meeting, Paco sat in a small cage and chirped, "Don't talk on the porch." They're listening. Then it squawked, "Violation, violation," in a tone so similar to Brenda's that someone snorted lemonade through their nose. Mr. Gomez insisted the parrot was repeating things it had heard, things said when no one else was around. And suddenly, everyone was staring at the birdhouses like they were landmines. Brenda didn't show up, but Daryl did. He was the interim HOA patrol officer, a pale man with a clipboard fused to his hand and an unfortunate mustache that made him look like a cartoon villain's unpaid intern. When pressed, he mumbled that the surveillance was just a trial program. But when asked who approved it, he pretended to get a phone call and left halfway through Sanjay's second slideshow. It was in every way a complete unraveling of the HOA's carefully manicured grip on the neighborhood. People were furious, but they were also laughing. The absurdity of it, the birdhouses, the parrot, the mic in the mailbox theory, had gone too far. That night, Grandpa sat outside on the porch, sipping iced tea like he was a victorious general surveying his battlefield. "You know," he said to me, "when I electrified that fence, I didn't think it'd spark a revolution. I just wanted to keep nosy weirdos out of my tomato patch." I asked him what he thought would happen next. He just shrugged. Depends on how crazy people are willing to get when their little kingdom starts to crumble. The answer came sooner than we expected. At the next HOA meeting, which, for the first time, was packed with over 50 angry residents, someone unexpected stood up. A tall, quiet man in a tweed vest who'd lived at the end of the street for years but never attended a single meeting. His name was Leonard Brinkley. He calmly walked to the front, opened a manila folder, and said, "As HOA president, I hereby dissolve this governing body effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Brenda, who had finally shown up looking like a cross between a Victorian schoolmistress and a deflated balloon, jumped out of her seat. "You can't do that," she yelled. Leonard didn't even blink. "Actually, I can. I started this HOA 12 years ago with a very different purpose. It was about shared responsibility, not surveillance. Not personal crusades. And definitely not microphones in birdhouses." The room went dead silent. Then Leonard added, almost as an afterthought, "Also, Brenda, this is long overdue. You killed my gardenias in 2012 when you rewrote the lawn watering schedule out of spite. I never forgot." A few people snickered. Someone clapped. Brenda looked like she might spontaneously combust, but before she could launch another protest, Leonard raised his hand and said, "The documents are signed. This meeting is over. Effective today, Grudgewood Lane is a free neighborhood." There was cheering. Actual, honest cheering. People hugged. Someone let off a confetti cannon left over from a baby shower. Grandpa stood still, blinking like he couldn't believe it. "Huh," he said. "That's not how I thought the war would end." Then he leaned over to me and whispered, "Still, we should probably keep the sprinkler glitter trap. just in case. In the weeks that followed, life in Grudgewood Lane changed. Slowly but surely, flamingos started appearing in front yards. The Ramirez family installed a 12-foot inflatable duck just because they could. Mr. Cho began offering bonsai classes. People painted their fences wild colors. The mailboxes stayed tilted. Paco the parrot became a minor celebrity. And Grandpa rewired the fence to play classic rock songs when triggered instead of delivering a jolt. The most popular was Sweet Home Alabama, which played every time the dog brushed up against the gate. One afternoon, I asked Grandpa if he was happy. He just looked at me and said, "I'm not happy. I'm satisfied." Then he winked and went back to welding something suspicious looking in the garage. That night, I stood outside staring at the stars, grateful that peace had finally settled over our suburban battleground. But just as I turned to go inside, I noticed a faint buzzing sound. High above the house, a tiny light blinked red against the night sky. A drone, hovering, watching. I looked at it, and it looked back. Then it zipped away into the dark, silent and fast. Inside, Grandpa was already sketching again. When I asked what he was working on, he smiled without looking up and said, "Anti-air." Grudgewood Lane would never be normal again. And honestly, we were all better for it.